As the military movements in the region continued to draw attention, the political reaction in Washington became just as important as the deployment of ships and aircraft. The United States suddenly found itself in a difficult position, facing pressure from several directions at once. On one side stood a longtime ally whose actions had triggered the crisis. On the other side stood rival powers ready to use the situation to challenge American influence in the Middle East. Leaders in the White House had to decide how to respond without pushing the conflict even further. Public statements called for stability, restraint, and the need to avoid a wider war, but behind those careful words there were clear signs of concern. Any wrong decision could pull the United States into a confrontation that would be costly both politically and economically. The situation was especially sensitive because the region involved is not only a battlefield of armies, but also the center of global energy supply. When tension rises there, the consequences are felt in markets, industries, and households all over the world. The uncertainty quickly spread to financial circles. Oil prices reacted to every new report coming from the Middle East, climbing as traders feared that the conflict might threaten production or transportation route. Even the possibility of disruption was enough to shake confidence. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important shipping lanes on the planet, became the focus of concern. A large portion of the world's oil passes through that narrow stretch of water, and any danger there can affect economies far away from the region itself. Shipping companies began to review their routes, and insurance costs for tankers increased as the risk level rose. When military forces gather near such a critical location, businesses prepare for the worst even if the worst never comes. This reaction shows how modern conflicts extend far beyond the battlefield. A single strike can influence prices, trade, and political decisions across the globe. European countries also watch the situation with growing anxiety. Many of them depend heavily on energy imports, and any instability in supply can slow economic recovery or increase inflation. Governments that had hoped for a period of calm suddenly faced the possibility of another crisis. Factories, transportation networks, and even agriculture can be affected when fuel becomes more expensive. Because of that, leaders in Europe called for dialogue and restraint, urging all sides to avoid steps that could make the situation worse. Their influence, however, was limited. The key decisions were being made elsewhere, and smaller powers could only react to what the larger ones chose to do. This imbalance is one of the realities of international politics. When major players move, everyone else must adjust. In Asia, the reaction was similar. Countries that rely on imported energy followed every development closely, knowing that higher prices could slow growth and create internal problems. Governments began to consider emergency plans in case supplies were reduced or transportation became unsafe. Even rumors of possible blockades or attacks near shipping routes were enough to cause concern. The global economy is closely connected, and events in one region can quickly affect another. Because of that, the strike that started as a regional action now carried worldwide consequences. It reminded everyone how fragile stability can be when strategic interests collide. Meanwhile, the political debate inside the United States became more intense. Some voices argued that strong support for allies was necessary to maintain credibility. Others warned that becoming too deeply involved in another conflict could bring long-term costs. Military advisors studied different scenarios, trying to predict how Russia, Iran, and regional groups might react to any American move. In situations like this, even a small step can lead to a larger response from the other side. That is why decisions are often slow and cautious, even when the public demands quick action. Leaders must think not only about the next day, but about the months and years that follow. At the same time, Iran appeared to take advantage of the uncertainty by strengthening its position quietly. Instead of rushing into direct confrontation, it focused on building support among its partners and improving its defenses. This approach allowed Tehran to show patience while still preparing for the possibility of further conflict. In the Middle East, influence is often built through networks of allies rather than through one army alone. Because of that, any crisis can spread across borders very quickly. What begins in one place can appear in another without warning. The possibility of such expansion made the situation even more difficult to control. Israel also faced a complicated reality after the strike. While the operation itself demonstrated military capability, the political and strategic consequences were harder to manage. Each reaction from other countries created new challenges that had to be considered. Security officials had to prepare for different kinds of threats at the same time, from missiles and cyber attacks to diplomatic pressure. In modern conflicts, victory is not measured only by what happens on the battlefield. It also depends on alliances, public opinion, and the ability to handle the long-term effects of every decision. The events following the attack showed how quickly a tactical success can turn into a strategic problem. As weeks of tension passed, it became clear that the crisis had changed the atmosphere of international politics. Trust between rival powers was weaker, and every side seemed more ready to rely on strength instead of negotiation. The idea that one country alone could control events in the Middle East looked less certain than before. New alliances, old rivalries, and shifting interests created a situation where no single player could decide the outcome. Instead, the future depended on how all of them reacted to one another. This kind of balance is unstable, but it is also the reality of a world where power is shared among several strong nations. In the end, the strike on Bushehr may be remembered not only for the damage it caused, but for the chain of reactions that followed. It showed how quickly the global system can be shaken when a sensitive line is crossed. Military strength, political decisions, and economic pressure all became part of the same struggle. Whether the crisis would fade or grow into something larger depended on choices still being made behind closed doors. For the moment, the world could only watch, aware that the outcome would shape the future of the region and possibly the balance of power far beyond it. A wave of shock has shattered the familiar rules that once governed the global geopolitical chessboard. While many political leaders were still hiding behind empty diplomatic statements and routine press briefings, Israel carried out one of the most daring and controversial moves in modern history, a move so risky that it felt like deliberately provoking a sleeping tiger. In a sudden and explosive action, a powerful strike was launched toward the Bushehr nuclear power facility, a site that represents not only Iran's technological ambition but also a symbol of Russian influence and protection in the region. This was not just another military operation or a limited air raid. It was an action that could be interpreted as a direct challenge to Moscow's authority, a strike that cut deeply into the pride of the Kremlin. No formal declaration, no warning, just a blow that sent a message loud enough to echo all the way to Russia. What happened cannot be dismissed as another routine clash in the Middle East. At this moment, the situation has begun to move into a far more dangerous phase, one where patience among the world's strongest powers is wearing thin. A new order has been issued from Moscow, and reports suggest that Russian naval forces have begun moving with unusual speed, leaving their ports and heading toward strategic waters with the kind of firepower capable of changing the balance of power overnight.